Once again, this is oral history interview of Lee Hale, Glen Dumont at Echo Lake Country Club, June 5th, 2012. First off, Lee, thanks for taking the time to sit down and do this. It's an important part of what we're doing, as you know, and glad you could take the time to do it this afternoon.
Happy to.
So, Lee, a few questions we should probably talk about. Where are you and your family from?
Well, I grew up in Shippensburg, a town of 5,000 people in south central Pennsylvania. My father died when I was 8 and my sister was 3. My mother had to work, so we were taken care of by a high school graduate, postgraduate.
Okay. And were you born in Shippensburg as well?
No, I was born October 20, 1924, 87 years ago, in Chambersburg, Pennsylvania, where they had a hospital. We didn't have one in Shippensburg.
Okay, so nearby, all right.
Nearby.
When did you and your family come to Westfield, and what brought you here?
Well, my wife and I came to Westfield in 51. We came to Westfield because I worked for Merck in Rahway, 7-8 miles. Westfield was probably the best, we thought, residential town near Rahway.
Right. Very good. Did you ever have any other family members in the area? Did your siblings or relatives move in?
Not really. Had no. I was from Pennsylvania, and no relatives here. My wife was born in Cranford, so
Okay.
she had family and friends here. Yeah.
Okay, so you didn't really grow up, but you spent a very good portion of your life here. So what was it?
Absolutely.
What was it like as you lived here over the years? What were you active in?
I grew up in Shippensburg, attended high school there. My high school days, I was sports editor in the high school newspaper, played varsity basketball, graduated second in a class of 100. Most of them didn't go to college, so it wasn't a tough 100 to be from. I attended my freshman year at Shippensburg State Teachers College, and then got a senatorial scholarship to Penn, so I transferred to Penn just before the war.
Well, that's why I've always liked you, Lee, because we're both Penn guys. So that's worked out well. And like you, I was a sports editor, so it's good.
Go.
Can you tell me a little bit about your affinity for sports and how that led to some of the things you'd done here in Westfield? Going off the script a little bit, but
Well, I no question. I grew up in high school. I played a lot of basketball. Loved that. I know I like sports. I followed the sports of the teachers' colleges there, and we went to their college games all over the state of Pennsylvania when they would play Kutztown, Westchester, Indiana State. And I've always liked sports. My mother was a music teacher. She let me do what I wanted to do. I wish she would have taught me a little, or made me do a little more of the music, which I never did. So it was sports, and when I came here, I did get interested in the boosters, and ultimately formed a Westfield Hall of Fame, Athletic Hall of Fame. So
good.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we'll talk about that in a little depth as we go on. But we were talking about church earlier. Can you talk to me a little bit about your church life and your church attendance? Did you attend church in Westfield? If so, where? What'd you do?
Well, first of all, I was a member of the Lutheran Church in Shippensburg. When I came here, we looked at the churches. The Presbyterian Church was extremely attractive. It was big. They had a superb minister, a buoyant congregation, growing, beautiful church. So we joined that. Didn't really look at the Lutheran, although that's what I grew up as out in Pennsylvania, which was heavily German, and therefore Lutheran was a big church out there.
Do you have any recollections of the church here in Westfield when you first came or joined?
Oh, it was impressive to me, I must say. I forget the minister before, Fred Christian, but he was an extremely good minister. And the church was growing then after the war. It was definitely an upward trend. The people that were running operating the church, just the parishioners themselves, they were all people that you had to regard fairly highly in Westfield. Even as a young person, you could sense that and feel it. It was very vibrant.
What world events had the most impact on you when you were growing up?
Well, this one I have a long answer,
Okay.
a long story here, Glenn. Pearl Harbor, clearly, and declaration of war against Germany and Japan. I was 17. I was a freshman at Shippensburg, state teachers. It meant interrupting college. Shortly, my reserve unit was called up in '43. I joined the reserve to try to avoid the draft, and they took us quicker than I would have gone in the draft. But in any case, so I had basic infantry training at Camp Wheeler, Georgia, for 3 months. After that, I was assigned to what they called a specialized training program in engineering at the University of Connecticut for 9 months. Subsequently, we were assigned to the 78th Lightning Division for 3 months training for combat in the States. Next, a troop ship to England, and 2 months of training on the beaches in Bournemouth, England. Then sent to the front. By then, the front was in Belgium because they had already landed, as part of General Hodges' First Army. I spent 2 weeks dug in a foxhole because everything was fairly stagnant at that point on the line against the German army. This is in the Ardennes forest. I got trench foot. I probably didn't have the right shoes because my feet were size 13. I got trench foot, frozen feet, in effect, in the winter of 1944, for which I was awarded the Purple Heart. I was sent back to England to a U.S. Army hospital to stabilize the frozen feet. Then a hospital ship to Charleston, South Carolina, and I was assigned to what they called Ashford General Hospital for operation or amputation of several toes. Ashford, by the way, for those of you who was the Greenbrier Hotel in White Sulphur Springs, West Virginia. You couldn't get a higher oriented place. They had converted it to a hospital. I was there 9 months, discharged with a disability discharge, October 31st, '45, and I enrolled at Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania for the last 2 years of college. So clearly the war was probably the biggest event that's ever happened to me in my
I'd say.
the big war.
Wow. What was the character of your family, Lee, and what would be a typical family dinner? Did you eat together? Did you have favorite menus or meals?
That wasn't very fancy. We had this woman, well, first of all, my mother was a teacher, and she would teach individual voice or choirs, and she was pretty busy keeping my food on the table. And we had this woman that she got who graduated from high school in Shippensburg, but her family, she needed to work, and my mother hired her as kind of a personal maid, etc. Did everything, cooked for us. So our meals were kind of weren't fancy. There was not a lot of wisdom passed down during the meals, I'll have to say, because she was busy and we were growing up, but we didn't have a whole lot.
Did you have a favorite, though? Anything that you liked growing up?
Well, I liked the Pennsylvania things,
Okay.
mush. No, there were a lot of good Dutch meals, but I'm still a meat and mashed potatoes and simple stuff. That's what we had. We didn't have a lot of fancy stuff.
Of all the things, and I know you said your dad passed away early on, but of all the things you learned from your parents, what do you feel was the most valuable?
Well, frankly, in a way, they both urged me to attend a top school out of Shippensburg because only 10% of the kids in my high school class went to college, and
Right.
almost all of them went to Shippensburg to become teachers. My dad had gotten a certificate by traveling after work in a bank. He worked in a bank in Shippensburg, to the University of Pennsylvania Extension School, which is 40 miles away in Harrisburg. So he took a train down there after work, did the stuff that you had to do to be a certificate person at Penn in Harrisburg. And basically, they were urging that I stretch against the backdrop of of these 90 of 100 of them who really didn't attend college. They wanted more for me. Basically made it happen one way or the other. Because he passed away, there was availability of what we called in Pennsylvania a senatorial scholarship. So the senator from our area was contacted by a friend of the family, and because my mother was left alone, to take care of us, it made an impression, and I was able to get this scholarship, which enabled me to do it, to go to a super school. And it was his school. He would have wanted to go there himself, but he had to go to work, and he went to Shippensburg State himself and was a local boy, but always looked to Penn as an incredibly upscale type place to
Very good.
have his child go.
So you were able to continue that and realize that dream. That's good.
Yeah, it sure was. That was impressed me from the beginning.
We've hit on part of this already with the education. Just talking a little bit about your education, professional background. On the educational front, you said you'd start out at Shippensburg and finished up at Wharton in 1945 to 1947.
Right.
But
Yep.
Anything else you'd like to add about your time at Penn?
Well, at Penn it was terrific. After the war, a lot of veterans came back, and I was not that old. I was 21, I suppose. A lot of them were a bit older. And then we had the freshmen coming in at age 17. That was kind of an interesting byplay. One of my senior guys and myself used to shoot pool against these young kids that came in. That was fun. Anyhow, the other interesting thing I did after retirement, college-wise, was attended history and art lecture series. Well, it's not a series, but classes at Princeton, which of course is close to Westfield. I had 42 years in controller, treasurer type functions, and never, even at Wharton, of course, didn't have a lot of history, English, and heavy cultural stuff. So made use of this. We attended, two or three of us started this, and others have picked it up. We probably attended practically all of the great history teachers at Princeton, all over the world, all American history, European, the whole thing, over 10 years. And we did art as well. They got a little tougher toward the end. When we started this, it was very easy to sit in on the classes with the students, but they were getting so many people that started to do this that they made it a bit more rigorous to get. But I was fortunate to do it for a long period, which was great.
So just to teach you a bit here, you sat in the art and history, but none of the music classes for your mom.
No, I never did the music. I resisted that, and I'm sorry to this day, because I love music. I like to dance, actually, and it didn't rub off, no.
All right, well, you still have some time left to find those music classes.
Yeah, okay, there's another year or two left, Brett.
Back to Merck, you talked about the treasury and controller type functions. Can you speak a little bit about your professional career with Merck?
It was in those functions all the way through. At one point, I was the controller of what was an international division of Merck and expanding worldwide. That was extremely exciting. Did that for 7 years, traveled pretty much all over most of the world with Merck. And it was terrific because Merck was going into a lot of new countries. So that was exciting. Then I came back, coming back to the headquarters. I was kind of the right-hand man in terms of information and how we doing, what's happening all over the world, reporting to the chairman of the company, at that time Henry Gadsden, who I respected as a terrific chairman of Merck. And I would have the opportunity to visit with him monthly, and I would bring a review of the financial results across the world, and also did work with him, with others, of course, but on the budgeting of the results of Merck. And I think this was probably the most rewarding, to be able to work with this man who I hugely regarded. He was a Yale, became vice chairman of Merck when Jack Connor, who was later secretary of, I forget which, Commerce, I think, actually. He was president of the company, and Gadsden was the next guy. Gadsden eventually became chairman. But and then the last 10 years, frankly, I was in the treasury area, which I had no experience in, but they needed somebody. They thought I could do it, in which we ran the pension money, health plans, incentive plans, executive bonus plans, that area of the treasury. And of course, at this time, probably the biggest later thrill was that Merck became, or was anointed as, the most admired company in America for 4 years, 86 to 89. And the chairman at that time was Dr. Roy Vagelos, who is a Penn graduate, by the way, and has a heck of a record of coming out of not much of a background, where his parents were immigrants, couldn't speak English, and he got scholarships to Penn because he served Merck scientists in Rahway. They had a restaurant there, and he was smart as hell, and so he got a scholarship to Penn. And later was chairman of the trustees, just a heck of a guy, and ran an incredible company, Merck, yeah.
You seem to have enjoyed your years there, but let me ask you this. If you could have done anything else professionally, what do you think it would have been?
Probably somewhere in the sports world. I would have probably liked to have been a sports writer, a person that could go to a lot of these events and be part of it, but then write about it. It would be pretty hard to beat that. I did it certainly in high school. My 1 year at Shippensburg, I did it, wrote up football. And then I wrote a sports book on Coach Kaler in Westfield. So I think it would have probably been in that area, because I like to watch it. I like to play a lot of them.
You also did a little bit of writing about Echo Lake, too, didn't you?
I did do that. Ray McEntee was the president of the club here in about 1988 or 88, say. He wanted to have a history of this club written. There was one written in the 50s by a revered guy, Dyke Faxon. It was small, and it brought the history up for the first 50, 60 years of Echo Lake. Had no pictures, wasn't fancy, wasn't like a sales brochure or anything. Ray wanted something a little more, asked me if I would do it. This was when I was close to retiring. I said, well, I probably should do it, because I might not make, this would be the 90th anniversary, I might not make the 100th, so I'm willing to try it, which I did, and then I did live long enough to improve it with 100 years. So anyhow, I enjoyed both of those. I think the second one was better than the first, but obviously it should be. You should learn something.
Now, are there copies of your book on Coach Kaler and Echo Lake?
There are certainly copies of the Kaler.
Right.
There's some in the library. I have some in my cellar. I always supply them to the downtown bookstore. Mm-hmm. If they get a little run, if something's said about Gary, there may be people inquire about it. I don't know how many, I forget how many we sold, but another guy and I, he was a sports writer for Suburban News, I think, and he and I kind of co-authored this book because we just thought it should be done. Gary was such a tremendous coach and revered. So yeah, there's some copies around. I think you can still get it from the town bookstore. It wasn't a national seller, of course, but wish it would have been, because the man deserved it.
Right.
They deserved a lot.
But it did document a fantastic coaching career here in Westfield and a long run of success for the team, as is indicated on the plaque at the stadium.
Yeah, it's an incredible.
And also the work you did to document the history of Echo Lake, which has been a part of the community for 100 years plus now. So.
Yeah, I think it is nice to have done that, and we have pictures in there. The club did not ever keep a whole lot of stuff like a Baltusrol. I've seen some of their files. They're very oriented toward that. Echo Lake was not, but we were able to come up with a reasonable amount of things, and I'm glad that we could document it, because I think it's a great club. It's one of the, the earlier clubs in New Jersey. And I think, and therefore, I think still one of the best.
Lee, let's talk a little bit about your contributions to the Westfield community and the Westfield Historical Society. In my mind, your major accomplishments would be your tenure here and your work as president of Echo Lake Country Club, your work around the Athletic Hall of Fame, the boosters, and then working with the Presbyterian Church in the Westfield Cremain section of the cemetery. Could you share your thoughts on each of those things with me, please?
Well, certainly we talked about the history of Echo Lake. I think one of the others that you didn't mention, I've enjoyed particularly working with the Downtown Westfield Corporation lately. And in 2004, we were able to attain from a national service something called the Great American Main Street Award in the year 2004. And that's for a town that has shown incredible ability to improve and retain and keep the good things. It was the way I got into this downtown was that Mayor Booth actually wanted to study it. So he had an agenda in mind, and he really asked me to form up a committee of people to study it and recommend it, although he knew he wanted it, and we had a committee that wanted it as well. So we created something called the Downtown Westfield Corporation, which is a special improvement district which taxes the downtown stores, the owners of the buildings. So there's a tax on them, and that is used presumably to promote, to amplify, to support the downtown and to keep it vibrant. I was so into it because I lived here since 1950, and I remember us looking up to Plainfield as the Queen City, and it was the Queen City, and it was better than Westfield, bigger, and had everything. And we saw it decline, particularly the center of town, but it declined everywhere. But the center of town just went, and I've spent a lot of time in my retiring years on things that would try to prevent that from happening, and not only prevent it, but even improve Westfield, not only just keep it like it is, but do it better.
Could you touch a little bit on your work with the Athletic Hall of Fame and the boosters?
Well, the boosters, that's kind of weird in a way. I got into it in the 60s. My son was born in 62 or 3, so he was a baby when I got into this. But some of my neighbors had football players and high school kids. I knew them well. I joined this booster group, which basically was fathers for the most part, although they had a few people other than that. And again, because of my interest in sports, it's just something that attracted me. So I went into it, and I became president of the darn thing in the 60s. And I've loved it ever since. I mean, I've met people over all the years. There were 40 people in it then. So when a child's father would go to college, he'd drop out usually, and somebody new coming in that had a 9th grader or something. That's what it was. And I was there without this portfolio, but I loved it. I did work on it. And these were years when, of course, football was glorified in Westfield, so it was pretty easy to be excited about it.
What were some of the things the boosters did during your tenure there? Do you recall, Lee?
The thing that was fun for us is that we had coaches from all the sports at our meetings throughout the year. And usually at their time of year, we'd have Gary after football, we'd have the basketball coach, Johnny Lay, and the basketball and the wrestling coach. So we got a lot of it out of that by hearing him. What do we do? Well, they provide scholarships. They support the programs. It's basically a supportive thing for the...
Were there any major building projects at that point, or is that more of a later thing since the budget cuts have come in? that they started building like the scoreboard at the baseball field and things?
Yeah, those. I think the Ellis scoreboard was in there, and that was a father of a booster. Actually, Roger Love and I went to the school board. This was after Gary's period of time. This was, I guess, early '80. And we asked that, we had got them to name the stadium, the field, Hale Stadium, which it is there now. And I think so rightly. So there were people saying, oh, you're doing this a little early. He's still living, because he was living at that time. But we felt so strongly that we should do this, and that whether he's living or not, we know him now, this is an easy time for us to do it. So we went to the school board meeting, and I remember it very well, and they did name it, and we and they raised some money to do it. And I think it is quite a nice stadium.
They'll pack the crowds in.
Yeah. Used to, sometimes 13,000 at just a plain field game. Well, it was Thanksgiving, but huge crowds. And of course, football isn't anywhere probably quite like that. Maybe in Ohio, maybe Massillon, Ohio or something. But it was great here in those days.
Would you spend a few minutes speaking about the Athletic Hall of Fame, Lee?
The Athletic Hall of Fame, we started it in 1994. It depends who you talk to, but Gary and I Gary Hale at that point had been out of coaching 14 years. He was the AD, probably at that time when we did start it. We just thought it was something that ought to be done to recognize some of the great athletic performances that people in Westfield, individuals and teams, would do. So we started in '94. We asked for help from a couple of people. Well, actually asked one person, and I won't say his name because for this I think it's worth it. Grover Connell, who's a pretty quiet individual in Westfield, but a major person, Connell Company. Anyhow, Gary wrote to him. I drafted the letter. Gary wrote it, sent it rather, and a check came back immediately for $2,500, which was what we wanted, enough to be able to create a nice dinner, a recognition, to have a program. There's some cost to it, having this ceremony. So we set it up in '94. We thought at the time and decided at the time, and it's still prevailing, that we should only do it every 2 years. Somehow we thought we'd run out of stars quickly if we did it every year. I'm not sure we would have, because there's a heck of a lot of them. But we did, and I think it was pretty smart. So we've had 8 or 9 of these inductions. Usually it comes down to setting 8 or 9 individuals and 1 or 2 teams and maybe a coach and so on, so that you can recognize across the board. Lately we've been doing as many, we usually do 2 teams, because it really attracts people to come, by the way. If you get 30 or 40 kids on a soccer team, 20 of their parents will come, and if not more. So I think it's been a good thing for the community. They're usually a little bit long, I have to admit, but if you have somebody in it, and if you have an inductee, that inductee a lot of times likes to talk. We have them at the Westwood in Garwood, and we have usually 250 to 300 people. And of course, we have a fee, which doesn't pay for the whole dinner, because we do have some expenses, particularly a program, and there's some freebies involved. And the other thing we've done is we've invited back the previous members, the current members call them. We've invited them back as our guests to this. And the ones that are in town and close do come, and I think it's been quite a wonderful thing there. We've had let's see, how have we done the speaker? Sometimes we've had exceptional speakers. Mostly it's the people that are going in.
How about the work you've done with the cremain section of the burial grounds at the Presbyterian Church in Westfield?
Well, I got into it about 5 or 6 years ago. I am a member of the church. They have in that cemetery, which is 280 plus years old, basically a cemetery for people who lived in the so-called West Fields of Elizabethtown farmers or modest merchants, but mostly farmers in the early days. So 1,100 or 1,200 gravestones, people in there, are from that area maybe 100 years later. And then at a point in 1970, it's owned by the Presbyterian Church, and the Presbyterian Church decided they'd like to open an area for cremation, which would be a smaller area of the cemetery, which was available. And they've carved this out as a section in which Presbyterians can elect cremation and be buried in there. And it's quite popular. If you think about it, it's a great historic cemetery. You're in there with, first of all, people that have done a heck of a lot that make this town great. And then you're in there maybe with people that you've known in the church for most of your life. For example, my friend Gary Kaler's in there, and a lot of the Presbyterians that I attended church with over the years and knew well are in there, including some current ones. So it's been kind of a labor. What happens in a cemetery, the stones are limestone or sandstone, and they do disintegrate some. And actually a lot broken, a lot fallen, a lot, some you can't read as well either, but mostly. So what we've done is we've hired, and there are firms that do this for cemeteries, to come in and patch up, erect in a good position again, so that the cemetery is really reflective of being current. Some of the stones are so broken and so bad that we have actually buried those at the site they're in, took a picture of them beforehand, this firm does, took a picture, and then take a picture of the ground after, so we know where the grave is. And the church has, with previous people, really documented that cemetery extremely fully. They have the names of all the people by row, and a lot of people have done a lot of work on this before. In terms of these actual work we've done, we got into it, after 40 years of not too much being done on that sort of thing, and we're trying to bring it back. And I think we have got it almost back. And we did new fencing to it, and we improved the cremains area to where it's more attractive, more reverent, more. And that's been our purpose. We want to, but we have a selfish purpose because, for example, my wife's there, and I have a little thing that says I'm to be there. I don't want to, not tomorrow, I hope, but right.
Of all these many things you've talked about, Lee, which would you say would be the most rewarding event or project, or one that you're most proud of?
Oh, God. I don't know if I could really single out. I have enjoyed working on almost all these things because I went in them because I probably knew I would be. They weren't drudgery. They were things that I really wanted to do. And probably in most cases wanted to try to improve them, or at least try to do that. But the Westfield Foundation, I'm proud of that. I didn't start it. In fact, when they started it, I don't think I contributed for a few years, but somewhere along the way I got the message, and some heavy-duty people in town gave to it, Bob Rook and others. And I saw the benefit of it, and I think now continue to see that serving on that was terrific. I mentioned the downtown. There, I'm on it because I think I can hopefully make a contribution to keep our town fresh, upgoing, not falling apart, not whatever. So that means a lot to me. Overlook Hospital, I've done that in later life. I can't say I'm just following others there. I'm on a foundation there. But interestingly maybe interesting, is that Westfield had something called the Westfield Hospitals Association back when I was a young man in Westfield. By then I mean I was maybe 40 and was working at Merck. And I became head of that. And what it did, it raised money from the community, would write an appeal to the community generally, and we would take in money, and the money was to be indicated to be in support of the hospitals Westfield was using, namely, at that point, Overlook, Muhlenberg, which was almost as big as, if not as big, and then Rahway, which was maybe 10%. The others were 45, say, 100% use. So that was our purpose. And at one point, we seriously, along with Ted Nelson, who's one of our great Presbyterians for a long time, just passed away. Ted had a big job with mobile, and he was supportive of my hospital association, and he wanted us to study whether we shouldn't build a hospital in Westfield. And I can't say we did a heavy-duty study, but we studied enough to know that the cost would be incredible to start a hospital when you have these at least two major ones that have buildings there and have a backup source. So we quickly decided that we were going to support the other hospitals, and of course over time, there is no hospital association. We just went, I guess you'd say, Westfielders basically started to serve on one or the other of those two hospitals, mostly the Muhlenberg and Overlook, and now really it must be very heavily Overlook, I think. That was the hospital story.
Do you have any thoughts or messages that you want to share with new members of the community or for future generations?
Well, I'll tell you what I urged them. I was awarded something the other night by John Bramnick by the legislature as a Westfield Citizen of the Year. And frankly, what I urged at the conclusion of that was, I hope everyone would, one, consider serving on things that help their community, serve maybe their fellow man as well, not just the community. I just finished a book by Bill Bradley, and although I'm a Republican and he's not a Republican, but he's a smart guy, and his book is, at the end of each chapter, he said, we can all do better. Every chapter was ended that way, and we should all do better. And if we did that, just think of it, 300 million people, and he was citing it as, USA is slipping, is behind China, or whatever, all those things which we read. And just saying that if everybody did a little bit more, a little bit better in their community, in their job, I guess anywhere, that would be the answer to getting America on track, or if you want to call it back on track. I don't know if we're totally off track, but there is a feeling by a lot of people that we need to get cranked up and be what we have been and can be. So I think that's the one. And I said in that, when he introduced me, I said, in my case, I really enjoyed doing all these things. And yet I also selfishly, really, I've met some incredibly interesting people over those years that I wouldn't have met if I didn't go for these various things that I did do. I mean, I met people like Hale and John Bramnick. Senator Kane was there that night, and Linda Maggio. But, if you don't serve on things, you don't do things, there's a lot of great people that you selfishly get to know, and they're your friends or pretty close. The other thing this is really philosophical, but I actually enjoyed working my last 10 years at Merck very much, whereas I know a lot of my friends who had achieved pretty good jobs at Merck and were doing very, very well. They sort of slacked off, and they were ready to retire. And although maybe retiring from your company is okay, but I think it's awful good if you can go into some things that challenge you and make it interesting, and where, of course, you could do hopefully some good, because if you're with a good company and you're a pretty decent employee, you can do a lot of good for the world and so on. So I think that's probably what I just feel like retirees. I don't think you should just be retired to play golf or to do the fishing or the easy things. if you can make it happen, that you're interested in doing these others, I recommend it, that's all.
Very good. What would you like to be most remembered for, Lee?
Well, I guess it's just doing hopefully good things in my community and in my company, both, because I think that's at the company I spent 40 years really trying to make it more profitable, more income, less expenses, successful, broadening its scope, and I really did the same thing when I went to these different organizations that I was involved in, was to make them better, for hopefully better. And I don't mean that I'm a superstar, but I think if you vote on, if you work there, you can do good things.
Anything we've not touched on that you'd like to add, Lee?
I think you might have covered it, Glenn. Yeah, that's a pretty good run through.
Oh, good. Well, thank you again for the time, and thanks for being a role model for so many of us. Appreciate it.
Well, thank you for asking me. I hope, yeah, it's nice. It's a nice thing to do.